She's been bleeding the family dry for a decade, and she did it while smiling at our Sunday dinners. That's what my brother Clayton said on the stand. Under oath. In a courtroom in Omaha, Nebraska, with our parents sitting in the front row, nodding like they were watching a sermon. He said it loud enough for every person in that room to hear, and he looked right at me when he said it. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, and I let him finish, because I've been letting Clayton finish for 34 years. And I knew, sitting right there in that courtroom on November 14th, that this was going to be the last time. My attorney, Arthur Miller, didn't react either. He just made a small note on his legal pad and waited. The way a man waits when he already knows exactly what's coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Because this story didn't start in a courtroom. It started in a cramped office behind a warehouse in South Omaha, 13 years ago, when I was 25 years old and stupid enough to believe that family meant something. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter while you were the one holding everything together, hit that like button and subscribe. My father, Wayne Langford, started Langford HVAC in 1994, built it from a single truck and a toolbox. By the time I graduated college, he had 14 employees, 2 service vans, and a reputation in the commercial contracting space that kept the phone ringing. He was proud of that business. It was the only thing I ever saw him show real emotion about. My mother, Patricia, ran the front office in the early days. Answered phones, filed invoices, made sure the guys got paid on Fridays. But by the time I came on, she'd stepped back, said she was tired, said the books were getting too complicated. So when my father asked me to take over as the bookkeeper, I said yes. I didn't hesitate. I didn't negotiate. I walked into that office on a Monday morning, opened a filing cabinet full of disorganized receipts, and got to work. They offered me $48,000 a year. I took it. The market rate for a bookkeeper handling a commercial HVAC operation that size, with bonding compliance, quarterly tax filings, vendor management, and payroll for a growing crew, was $85,000. I knew that. I looked it up before I accepted the offer, but my father asked me with this look on his face, like he needed me, like I was the only person in the world he could trust with the thing he'd built from nothing. And I told myself that family didn't nickel and dime each other. I told myself the gap would close over time, that they'd see what I was worth and adjust. They never adjusted. For 13 years, I kept those books clean. I reconciled every account monthly. I caught a $14,000 tax overpayment in year 2 and got it refunded. I negotiated vendor terms that brought material costs down 11% across 3 fiscal years. I maintained margins at 22%, consistent, quarter after quarter, in an industry where 15% was considered healthy. When the state auditor came through in 2019, he spent 4 hours in my office, reviewed 6 years of records, and told my father he'd never seen a cleaner set of books from a company that size. My father nodded, said thank you, never mentioned it again. Meanwhile, Clayton was finding himself. That was the phrase my mother used whenever anyone asked what her youngest was doing. He tried real estate, didn't pass the exam. He tried selling medical devices, lasted 5 months. He enrolled in an online marketing program, dropped out after the 3rd module, and told everyone at Thanksgiving that formal education was a scam designed to keep creative people down. Patricia laughed. She thought it was clever. In 2021, my father brought Clayton into the business. Head of sales. The title sounded impressive. The job was supposed to involve landing new commercial contracts, building relationships with property managers, expanding the client base beyond Omaha into Lincoln and Council Bluffs. His salary was $95,000 a year. I stared at that number on the payroll sheet for a long time the first time I entered it. $95,000. For a man who had never sold anything in his life. For a man who had never brought in a single signed contract. For a man who was 4 years younger than me and had been given a title I could have held with one hand tied behind my back while still keeping margins at 22%. I was still making $48,000. I swallowed it. I pushed it down. I told myself this was simply what family did. You gave more than you got, and eventually the balance would shift. That's what I told myself every single time I entered Clayton's paycheck and then entered mine, side by side, in the same spreadsheet. Over 13 years, the difference between what I earned and what the market would have paid me came to $481,000. $481,000. That's what I gifted to Langford HVAC, not in a check, not in a wire transfer, in years. In silence. In every Sunday dinner where Patricia talked about Clayton's potential and never once mentioned that the reason the lights stayed on was because I caught every billing error before it became a problem. Clayton's first 6 months in the sales role produced exactly 0 new contracts, not one. But he expensed $3,200 in client dinners during that period. Steakhouses, a rooftop bar downtown, one receipt from a Japanese restaurant in Kansas City that I couldn't connect to any client meeting, any lead, any name in any file. I flagged it internally, made a note, filed it in my backup folder, a habit I developed years earlier, copying key records to an external drive I kept at home, just in case. I didn't know what just in case meant at the time. I just knew that numbers had a way of telling stories people didn't want told, and I wanted to make sure those stories were preserved. Then, 18 months ago, the checks started. The first one was for $4,200. Payable to Midwest Parts and Supply. I'd never heard of them. We had 3 parts vendors we'd used for years. Anderson Supply out of Des Moines, Heartland Mechanical in Lincoln, and TJ White Industrial here in Omaha. Midwest Parts and Supply wasn't on any vendor list I'd ever maintained. But the check was signed by Clayton, coded to the operating account under Equipment and Materials, and it had already cleared by the time I saw it. I made a note. I pulled the canceled check. I searched for Midwest Parts and Supply in every database I had access to. No website, no phone number. No physical address beyond a P.O. box in Bellevue. 2 weeks later, another check. $6,800. Same vendor, same signature, same account code. Over the next 16 months, 13 more checks followed. The amounts varied: $4,200, $6,800, $9,100, $11,500, $7,300, $8,900, $5,600, $12,400, $8,200, $6,700, $9,400, $7,800, $5,300, $5,200. 14 checks total. Every single one signed by Clayton Langford. Every single one payable to Midwest Parts and Supply. Every single one coded to a vendor that had no website, no warehouse, no employees, and no product. The total was $108,400. I documented everything, every check number, every date, every amount, every canceled image from the bank. I saved them to my backup drive. I didn't say a word, because I was still telling myself that there had to be an explanation, that maybe Clayton had found a new supplier, that maybe I'd missed something, that maybe my brother, who'd never held a job longer than 5 months in his life, had somehow stumbled into a legitimate business relationship with a parts company that existed only as a post office box. I was still making excuses. I was still keeping the peace. Then came June 12th. I walked into the office that morning at 7:45, same as every day. My coffee was still hot. My laptop bag was over my shoulder. I pushed open the door to the main office and found Clayton standing behind my desk. Not sitting. Standing. Arms crossed. My father was in the corner by the window, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. My mother was seated in the chair I kept for vendors, her purse in her lap, her mouth set in a thin, satisfied line. Clayton looked at me and smiled. "We found the discrepancy, Phoebe." I set my bag down slowly. What discrepancy? The missing funds. Over $100,000. Unaccounted for. We had an outside consultant look at the books. There was no outside consultant. I knew that the way I knew the sun would come up. No one had accessed those files but me. No one had the passwords. No one had the login credentials for the accounting software. Clayton couldn't have navigated a balance sheet with a flashlight and a map. "You're done," he said, effective immediately. I looked at my father. Wayne Langford stood in the corner of the office he'd built with his own hands, and he didn't look up. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't gentle. It was permission. I looked at my mother. Patricia tilted her head to one side, the way she always did when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. "It's better this way, Phoebe. For everyone." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I picked up my bag. Clayton stepped around the desk and held the door open. Not for courtesy. For show. 3 technicians in the hallway watched me walk past. Nobody said a word. In the parking lot, my mother was already there. She had a black trash bag in one hand, the heavy-duty kind, the kind you use for yard waste, and she was pulling things from a cardboard box on the tailgate of my father's truck, my desk calendar, a framed photo of Lily from 2nd grade, a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Aunt," that Lily had picked out at a craft fair, my reading glasses, a small potted succulent I'd kept alive for 4 years on the windowsill above my monitor. Patricia stuffed each item into the trash bag without looking at any of them. She tied it off with a knot and dropped it on the asphalt next to my car. "There you go," she said. "That should be everything." I picked up the bag. I put it in my trunk. I got in my car and I drove home. I didn't cry until I pulled into the driveway. And even then, I waited until the garage door closed behind me and the engine was off and the house was silent. Then I put my forehead on the steering wheel and I let it come. 3 weeks later, a process server showed up at my front door. Patricia and Wayne Langford, doing business as Langford HVAC LLC, were suing their daughter for $110,000 in misappropriated funds. The complaint alleged that I had systematically embezzled from the family business over a period of no less than 7 years. It alleged that I had created false vendor accounts, inflated expense reports, and diverted operating capital into personal accounts. Every single allegation described exactly what Clayton had done. I read the complaint twice, standing in my kitchen while Lily ate cereal at the table. She looked up at me with those wide brown eyes, Thomas's eyes, my late husband's eyes, and asked if everything was okay. "Everything's fine, sweetheart." It wasn't fine, but she was 9. She didn't need to carry that. What she did end up carrying was worse. It was 3 days before the family's 40th anniversary gala. Patricia called the house, not my cell phone, the landline. I didn't answer, so Lily picked it up the way she always did, bright, eager, happy to hear Grandma's voice. I was in the next room. I heard every word through the doorway. "Lily, honey, you need to tell your mother something for me. You and she are not coming to the party this weekend, not until she gives back what she took. Your mother is a thief who is taking food out of your cousins' mouths, and you're not real family until that money comes back." The line went dead. I walked into the kitchen and found Lily standing by the counter, the phone still pressed against her ear, tears running down both cheeks in silence. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't wailing. She was just standing there, perfectly still, the way a child stands when something inside them has cracked so deeply they don't know how to make a sound. "Mom," she whispered, "am I not real family?" I knelt down. I took the phone from her hand and set it on the counter. I pulled her into me, and I held her so tight I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. "You are the most real thing in my life," I said. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you different." She buried her face in my shoulder, and her small fingers twisted into the fabric of my shirt until her knuckles went white. That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, her face still swollen, her pillow still damp, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The house was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen. The street light cut through the blinds in thin, pale lines across the floor. I opened the drawer beneath the counter and pulled out the backup drive, the one I'd kept for 13 years, just in case. I plugged it in. The files loaded slowly. 14 scanned checks, bank statements, vendor records. A Secretary of State filing I'd pulled 6 months earlier showing the registered agent for Midwest Parts and Supply, Clayton Langford, 100% owner. I stared at the screen for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the foundation settling. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a wire pulled taut for 13 years that finally gave way without a sound. I was done pretending this was okay. I picked up my phone. It was 3:17 a.m. The screen lit up the kitchen in cold blue light. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I'd saved 4 days after the process server showed up at my door. Arthur Miller, attorney at law. I'd found him through a referral from a colleague at my old accounting continuing education group. She told me he was sharp, methodical, and that he didn't waste words. She said he was the kind of lawyer who let the other side talk themselves into a corner and then locked the door behind them. I typed one sentence. I have the evidence. All of it. I'm ready. I pressed send, set the phone face down on the table, and for the first time in 13 years, I felt the weight shift. Not gone, just redistributed, placed exactly where it belonged. Arthur called me at 8:12 a.m. I answered on the first ring. We spoke for 11 minutes. I told him about the backup drive, about the 14 checks, about Midwest Parts and Supply and the P.O. Box in Bellevue, and the Secretary of State filing with Clayton's name on it. I told him about the $108,400. I told him about the $481,000 in suppressed wages. I told him about Patricia calling my 9-year-old daughter a thief's child and barring her from a family party. Arthur was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said 5 words. Bring me everything on Monday. I did. I drove to his office in Midtown Omaha with the backup drive in my purse and a manila folder containing printed copies of every check, every bank statement, every vendor search I'd run, and the Secretary of State filing. I sat across from his desk while he reviewed each document in silence, turning pages slowly, occasionally making a note in a small leather-bound notebook. When he finished, he closed the folder and set it on the desk between us. Phoebe, they didn't just file a bad lawsuit. They filed a lawsuit that describes their own son's crime and attributed it to you. Every allegation in this complaint, false vendor accounts, diverted operating capital, inflated expenses, that's not what you did. That's what Clayton did. And you have 14 canceled checks with his signature to prove it. I nodded. I'm going to file a counterclaim and a motion to dismiss, and I'm going to enter every one of these documents into the court record as part of our defense. Once that happens, it becomes public. Do you understand what that means? It means it's not just a family matter anymore? That's right. And I'm also going to refer this to the county attorney's office for criminal review. Check fraud. 14 counts. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Lily standing in the kitchen with the phone pressed against her ear, tears running down her face in silence, the way her fingers twisted into my shirt like she was holding on to the only solid thing left in her world. Yes. Arthur didn't ask again. He just opened his notebook and started writing. The months between that meeting and the trial moved slowly. I found work within 3 weeks. A private forensic accounting firm in West Omaha offered me a position at $125,000 a year, more than double what my own family had paid me for 13 years. The hiring manager reviewed my credentials, asked about my experience with bonding compliance and commercial auditing, and extended an offer before I left the building. I didn't tell anyone in my family. There was no one left to tell. Lily and I settled into a rhythm: school drop-off, work, homework at the kitchen table, dinner together every night. She stopped asking about Grandma and Grandpa after the first month. She stopped asking if we'd be invited to Christmas after the second. By the 3rd month, she'd stopped mentioning them at all, not because she'd forgotten, because she'd learned. And no 9-year-old should have to learn that lesson. November 14th arrived the way most important days do, without ceremony. I woke up at 5:30, made coffee, ironed my blouse, braided Lily's hair before dropping her at school, told her I had an important meeting and that Mrs. Anderson next door would pick her up if I ran late. Is it about the family stuff? Lily asked from the back seat. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I hope they hear the truth, Mom. I watched her walk into the school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, and I sat in the car for 30 seconds with my hands on the wheel before I pulled away. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead, a judge's bench that looked like it had seen 40 years of arguments. My parents sat in the front row behind their attorney's table. Patricia wore a navy blazer and pearls, her posture rigid, her chin lifted slightly in that way she had when she believed she was on the right side of something. Wayne sat beside her in a gray suit that didn't quite fit anymore, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. He looked smaller than I remembered. Clayton sat at the plaintiff's table next to their attorney. He was wearing a charcoal suit I'd never seen before. Italian cut, slim lapels, the kind of suit that costs more than my monthly mortgage payment. He looked confident. He looked like a man who believed his own story. Arthur and I sat at the defense table. He had a single banker's box beside his chair and a leather folder open in front of him. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man who had already read the last page of the book. Clayton took the stand first. Their attorney walked him through the narrative, the discovered discrepancies, the missing funds, the years of alleged embezzlement. Clayton delivered it with practiced sincerity. He furrowed his brow at the right moments. He paused for effect when describing how betrayed the family felt. He called me a parasite with a calculator. He said I was a glorified secretary who had been skimming from the people who gave me everything. She's been bleeding the family dry for a decade, and she did it while smiling at our Sunday dinners. Patricia nodded from the front row. Wayne stared at the floor. Then it was Arthur's turn. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket with one hand, picked up the leather folder and walked to the center of the courtroom, the way a man walks when he knows every step matters and none of them need to be rushed. "Mr. Langford," he said, "you testified that my client created false vendor accounts to divert company funds. Is that correct?" "That's exactly what she did." "And you testified that you discovered this discrepancy yourself, through an outside consultant. Is that correct?" "Yes." "We brought someone in to review the books. Can you provide the name of that consultant?" Clayton hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "But I saw it." Arthur saw it. We used a firm out of Lincoln. I don't have the name in front of me." "You don't have the name of the firm you hired to investigate over $100,000 in alleged fraud." "It was my father's contact. I'd have to check." Arthur didn't press it. He just made a note. Then he turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit Exhibit D into the record." He opened the banker's box and removed a thick, tabbed binder. Inside were 14 canceled checks, each one enlarged to full-page size, each one annotated with the date, the amount, and the signature line. Arthur placed the first check on the projector, $4,200, payable to Midwest Parts and Supply, signed by Clayton Langford, dated March 3rd, 2022. "Mr. Langford, is that your signature?" Clayton's jaw tightened. "I sign a lot of checks for the company." "That's a yes?" "Yes." Arthur placed the second check, $6,800. Same vendor, same signature. Then the third, $9,100. Then the fourth. He placed all 14 checks into the record, one at a time, reading each amount aloud in a voice that never rose above conversational. $4,200, $6,800, $9,100, $11,500, $7,300, $8,900, $5,600, $12,400, $8,200, $6,700, $9,400, $7,800, $10,400, 14 checks, all payable to Midwest Parts and Supply, all signed by you, totaling $108,400. The courtroom was silent. The court reporter, Sarah Smith, had stopped typing and was staring at the projected check on the screen. Arthur reached into the folder one more time and removed a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor, this is a filing from the Nebraska Secretary of State's office. It shows the registered agent and sole owner of Midwest Parts and Supply, LLC." He said it on the projector. "Clayton Langford, 100% owner, filed 14 months ago. Address: a P.O. box in Bellevue, Nebraska." Arthur turned back to Clayton. "Your Honor, we'd like to ask the plaintiff why he signed 14 checks to a company that consists of nothing but a P.O. box in his own name?" Clayton's face changed, not all at once. It was like watching color drain from a photograph. The confidence emptied out of his expression in stages. First the eyes went flat, then the jaw slackened, then his hands gripped the edge of the witness box until his knuckles turned white. He looked at his attorney. His attorney was already looking down at the table. He looked at Patricia. She was sitting perfectly still, her pearls catching the fluorescent light, her mouth slightly open but producing no sound. He looked at Wayne. Wayne Langford sat in the front row of a courtroom in Omaha, Nebraska, and stared at his own shoes. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Those were legitimate vendor payments, Clayton said. His voice cracked on the word legitimate. To a company you own, Arthur said, that has no employees, no warehouse, no website, no product, no phone number, just a post office box and your signature on the Articles of Incorporation. Clayton opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Arthur turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss with prejudice. Additionally, we are formally requesting that this matter be referred to the Douglas County Attorney's Office for criminal review. 14 checks. $108,400, written to a shell company owned by the plaintiff himself. This isn't a bookkeeping discrepancy. This is check fraud. The judge looked at Clayton. Then at Clayton's attorney. Then at my parents sitting in the front row. Case dismissed, with prejudice. I'm also issuing sanctions against plaintiff's counsel for filing this action without conducting basic due diligence that would have revealed the ownership of the vendor in question. The referral for criminal review is granted. The gavel came down once. A single, clean sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls and settled into every corner of that room. Clayton stood up from the witness box. His legs didn't seem to work properly. He gripped the railing and stepped down like a man who'd just been told the floor might not hold his weight. Patricia was already on her feet, clutching her purse, her face the color of paper. Wayne hadn't moved. He sat in exactly the same position, hands folded, eyes down, as if the entire proceeding had happened to someone else's family. I stood up. I closed the single notebook I'd brought with me, the one I hadn't needed to open. I put it in my bag. Arthur began packing the banker's box. Quietly, methodically, the way you clean up after something that's already been decided. Clayton turned toward me as I stepped into the aisle. His mouth was working, trying to form words, but whatever he wanted to say died somewhere between his chest and his teeth. Patricia reached for my arm as I passed the front row. Her fingers grazed my sleeve. Phoebe, wait. We need to talk about this. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. I didn't slow down. I walked out of that courtroom, down the hallway, through the double doors, and into the November air. The sky was flat and gray, the kind of Omaha sky that promises nothing and delivers exactly that. My car was parked on the second level of the garage across the street. I got in, set my bag on the passenger seat, and put both hands on the wheel. I sat there for a moment. The parking garage was silent except for the distant sound of traffic on Farnham Street. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. Just a clean, sharp clarity, like stepping out of a building you didn't realize had no windows until you felt the air on your face. I started the engine. I pulled out of the garage without looking back. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table one more time. The house was dark except for the glow of my phone screen. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Patricia Langford. Blocked. Wayne Langford. Blocked. Clayton Langford. Blocked. I opened the family group text. The one Patricia had started 6 years ago. The one where she posted photos of Clayton's kids and holiday menus and never once mentioned Lily's birthday. I removed myself. I opened my email, found every thread with a Langford HVAC address, selected all, and archived without reading. I changed the code on the front gate. I removed Patricia from Lily's emergency contact list at school and replaced her with Mrs. Anderson. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. Each tap on the screen felt like setting down something I'd been carrying for 13 years. Not dropping it. Setting it down. Deliberately, calmly. The way you place something fragile on a shelf and walk away, knowing you'll never pick it up again. The phone buzzed once more before I turned off the ringer. A voicemail notification from a number I'd already blocked. I deleted it without listening. The door closed softly. No slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. The weeks following the trial moved the way water moves through a crack in concrete. Slow, quiet, irreversible. I didn't seek out information about what was happening to Langford HVAC. I didn't need to. Omaha's commercial contracting community isn't large. People talk. And when a company that's been around for almost 30 years suddenly has a criminal fraud referral attached to its name, people talk fast. The first thing that happened was the bonding certification. Every commercial HVAC contractor in Nebraska needs bonding to work government and institutional jobs. It's not optional, it's not negotiable. It's the thing that separates a company that can bid on a hospital renovation from a company that fixes residential units in the summer. Langford HVAC had carried that certification for over 2 decades. My father built his entire business model around it. Within 60 days of the trial, the bonding company pulled the certification. The criminal referral was enough. An active investigation into financial fraud inside the operating accounts meant the surety underwriter couldn't guarantee the company's obligations. The certification lapsed. No appeal, no extension, no grace period. Just a letter in the mail and a phone call that lasted less than 4 minutes. The city hospital contract was the first to go, $340,000 annually. Langford HVAC had serviced that account for 11 years. I'd personally managed the invoicing, the compliance documentation, and the quarterly maintenance reports for every one of those 11 years. The hospital's facilities director called Wayne directly to inform him that without active bonding, they were required to terminate the contract and rebid it. Wayne asked for 60 days to resolve the issue. The facilities director gave him 30. The certification never came back. 2 more commercial accounts followed within the month. A property management group that handled 6 office buildings downtown, a school district maintenance contract that Clayton had supposedly been nurturing for 2 years, but that I knew had been secured through a relationship my father built in 2015. Gone. All of it. 3 contracts. $340,000 in annual revenue, evaporated like moisture off hot asphalt. I heard about the rest through a former colleague at my continuing education group. She worked for a firm that handled tax preparation for several contractors in the metro area, and she told me what she'd heard over coffee one Tuesday afternoon. I didn't ask. She just told me, the way people do when they've watched something coming for a long time and can't quite believe it actually arrived. Without the commercial contracts, Langford HVAC was reduced to residential service calls. The kind of work my father had moved away from 15 years ago because the margins were thin and the competition was brutal. The crew shrank. 14 employees became 8, then 5. 2 of the senior technicians, men who had worked for my father for over a decade, left for competitors within the first 3 months. They didn't make a scene. They just updated their resumes and were gone by the following Monday. Clayton's $95,000 salary disappeared. There was nothing left to pay it from. He was listed as an employee through the end of December, and then his name stopped appearing on any filing my former colleague could find. She said the word around the industry was that he'd taken a job managing inventory at a plumbing supply warehouse off I-80. $42,000 a year. No title. No office. No charcoal Italian suit. The criminal referral moved through the Douglas County Attorney's Office at its own pace. I wasn't involved. Arthur had submitted the documentation, the referral had been granted, and from that point forward, it was the state's business, not mine. But public records are public records. Clayton was formally charged with 14 counts of check fraud 4 months after the trial. The total amount, $108,400, was listed in the charging documents alongside his name, his address, and the name of the shell company he'd created to steal from his own family's business. I didn't read the full filing. Arthur sent me a 1-line email confirming the charges had been filed. I read it once, closed it, and went back to the report I was working on for my new employer. My parents spent $45,000 on the boutique law firm they'd hired to sue me. That money was gone. The sanctions the judge issued against their attorney meant additional penalties on top of the fees already paid. And the $110,000 they'd claimed I owed them didn't just disappear, it reversed. The restitution order that came out of Clayton's criminal case put the repayment obligation on him, not the company. But Clayton didn't have $108,400. Clayton didn't have a fraction of that, so the debt sat there, accruing, dragging everything down with it. They sold the Florida condo. the 2-bedroom unit in Fort Myers that Patricia had talked about at every Sunday dinner for the last 5 years, the one where she and Wayne were going to retire, the one where Clayton's kids were going to spend spring breaks building sandcastles while Lily was never once invited. They listed it in February and sold it in March for less than they owed on the mortgage. The proceeds went to legal fees, the sanctions penalty, and a partial payment on the restitution order. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The house in Omaha went on the market in April, the 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street where I grew up, where Clayton got a bedroom with a television at 14, while I shared a bathroom with a linen closet, where Patricia hosted Thanksgiving every year and set the table for 12 and never once asked Lily to say grace. They listed it at $310,000. It sold for $287,000. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Bellevue, shared laundry in the basement, street parking, no yard. Wayne took a part-time consulting role with a former competitor, answering technical questions about older commercial systems, the kind of institutional knowledge that lives in a man's hands after 30 years of work. It paid $22 an hour. He drove a 10-year-old Ford to and from the office 3 days a week, and the rest of the time he sat in that apartment while the business he'd built from a single truck and a toolbox dissolved around him like sugar in rain. I heard Patricia tried to call me twice during that period. Both calls bounced to nothing. The number was blocked. The gate code was changed. The family group text no longer existed. There was no channel left open, no back door, no emergency frequency. I had removed every point of entry with the same precision I'd used to reconcile those books for 13 years. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it to protect the only person who had never done anything wrong. 1 year later, everything had changed. Lily and I were at Hanscom Park on a Saturday in November. The air was sharp and clean the way it gets in Omaha right before the first real frost. The leaves had turned and half of them had already fallen, and Lily was running through them in a brand new soccer uniform, navy blue with white stripes, number 7 on the back, her name pressed across the shoulders in block letters. She'd made the select team 3 weeks earlier. Her coach told me she was one of the most focused players he'd ever worked with at her age. She was 10 now, taller than most of the girls in her class. She had Thomas's eyes and his way of going quiet when she was thinking about something important. She laughed more than she used to. She slept through the night. She'd made 3 close friends at school, real friends, the kind who came over for pancakes on Saturday mornings and stayed until dark. I sat on the bench near the south end of the field and watched her run a passing drill with her teammates. My coffee was still warm. The morning light came through the trees in long, amber lines that moved across the grass every time the wind shifted. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. A text from an unsaved number. I recognized the area code. Douglas County. Phoebe, this is Mom. I know you probably won't read this. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. For everything I said to Lily. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please. Can we just talk? I read it once. The words sat on the screen like old receipts. Faded, creased, evidence of a transaction that had already been settled. I deleted it without responding. Lily jogged over from the field, her cheeks flushed, her shin guards already muddy. Did you see that cross, Mom? Coach said it was the best one all practice. I saw it. You were perfect. She dropped onto the bench next to me and leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat like that for a while, watching the other girls run drills, listening to the coaches call out formations, feeling the November wind move through the park without hurrying. Mom? Yeah? I like our life. I put my arm around her and pulled her close. Her hair smelled like grass and the lavender shampoo she'd started picking out herself at the store. I like our life too. I wasn't the one who broke that family. I was just the only one who bothered to keep it glued together. I'm retired from that job now. Some doors close so better ones can open. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.